Chinedu, wait. I only came to help her.
You want to make me motherless, right?
At 17 minutes past 2 in the morning, every light inside Umuori General Hospital died at once. No warning, no flicker, just darkness swallowing the whole building like a mouth closing over food. Amara lay on the hospital bed, her wrapper soaked through with sweat, her swollen belly rising and falling too fast. 8 months she had carried this child. 8 months of prayer, of hiding tears, of holding her own stomach like a woman protecting the last coin in her purse. And now, in the blackness, the machine beside her, that had been beeping her baby's heartbeat into the room, went silent. No sound. No green light. Nothing. "My baby," she whispered, gripping the edge of the bed. "My baby. Talk to me." Outside her door, a police guard shifted his feet in confusion, his torchlight useless against a darkness that seemed to be waiting for exactly this moment. Down the corridor, footsteps moved fast and careful, the footsteps of someone who did not want to be heard. Auntie Razor, a big-boned woman with a bandaged hand, pressed herself against the wall, a small stolen phone hidden inside that same bandage. On it lived a recording that could save Amara's life, a voice confessing to a crime everyone believed belonged to Amara alone. But Auntie Razor was still 3 doors away, and someone else was already closer. The handle on Amara's door turned slowly, the way a person turns a handle when they do not want the room to know they are coming. Amara held her breath. Her contractions were arriving now every few minutes, sharp enough to steal her voice, but she forced herself to stay silent, to listen. A shape stepped inside. "Who is there?" Amara managed, her voice shaking worse than her hands. There was no answer at first, just breathing, close and unhurried, the breathing of someone who had already decided how this night would end. Then a voice she knew, a voice she had once trusted with her whole life, leaned toward her in the dark and said the words that would follow her forever. "Once the baby is born, nobody will need you again. My people, before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back. Because what led a pregnant woman to be guarded like an armed robber? What led her to lie helpless in a hospital bed while darkness hid her enemies among her helpers? All of it began 11 days earlier. It began with something as small, as ordinary, as a single cup of herbal tea. Now tell me, if the people meant to protect you become the ones standing over you in the dark, who is left to call your name?"
Hi viewers, if you were lying on that hospital bed right now, helpless and in labor, and you heard that voice behind you in the dark hand, whose voice do you think it was? Drop your guess in the comments.
11 days before the blackout, Amara was on her knees in the cocoa farm before the sun had fully climbed the sky. Her fingers moved gently among the young pods, checking for the ones ready to be harvested and the ones that still needed the patience of time. Her belly made the bending difficult, but she did not complain. This farm was not just soil and trees to her. It was inheritance. It was her late father's voice still speaking, even from the grave. "A tree without roots," he used to tell her when she was a girl following him between the rows, "will beg every wind for permission to stand." She had never forgotten it, and now, carrying his grandchild inside her, she understood the saying with her whole chest. Not far from the farm, her husband Chinedu sat outside their small house, his palm resting on Amara's stomach as she rested in the shade after her morning work. He spoke softly to the child inside her, promising football boots, promising school fees, promising a father's love that would never run dry. In those quiet moments, Chinedu was gentle, almost boyish, a man who still remembered how to be tender. But that same gentleness made him blind to the storm gathering around his wife. 2 days earlier, Amara had returned from the market to find wooden pegs driven into the earth at the edge of her father's farm, the unmistakable mark of surveyors. She had not authorized any survey. She had not sold, leased, or discussed a single inch of that land with anyone outside her own 2 hands. That evening, Mama Ngozi called her into the parlor, her voice syrup-sweet, the way it always was before trouble. A mining company wants to buy the farm, Mama Ngozi said, sliding a folder of documents across the table. Good money. Enough to build a proper house, enough for the child's future. The land already belongs to my child's future, Amara answered carefully. My father left it so that no wind would blow me over. Mama Ngozi's smile thinned like harmattan dust settling over a compound. A woman who enters her husband's house owns nothing separately, she said, tapping the folder. This matter will be settled before that baby of yours arrives. Mark my words. Amara said nothing more. She simply gathered the documents, left them untouched, and walked back to her room, her hand resting protectively on her stomach the whole way. She did not know that a lawyer had already been contacted. She did not know that somewhere in that house, plans concerning her unborn child were already being written on paper, discussed in whispers, sealed with signatures that were not hers. That night, Mama Ngozi insisted on preparing her own herbal tea, waving off the housegirl who usually did it. My hands still work, she said, laughing lightly. Let me do this one myself. She carried the steaming cup to her room and sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the very farm she wanted so badly to take. Minutes later, a cry tore through the house. Amara ran from her room to find Mama Ngozi collapsed in her chair, white foam gathering at the corner of her mouth, a half-empty bottle of pesticide lying beneath her seat, as though it had fallen there by accident, or as though it had been placed. Amara rushed forward to help her, lifting her head, calling her name. Mama Ngozi's eyes opened just enough to find Amara's face in the lamplight, and with a weak, trembling finger, she pointed straight at her daughter-in-law. She put it inside my drink, she whispered. Chinedu did not stop to ask a single question. He heard his mother's accusation, and something inside him shut, like a door slammed by wind. He crossed the room, seized Amara by the arm, and dragged her away from the woman she had been trying to save. Chinedu, wait! Amara begged, twisting to protect her stomach with her free hand. I only came to help her. He did not listen. In one motion, his palm cracked across her face, sending her stumbling backward into the wall. Pain shot through her waist, sharp and sudden, and she doubled over, both hands wrapping around her belly as though her arms alone could shield the child inside. You wanted to make me motherless, Chinedu said, his voice shaking with a fury Amara had never heard from him before. Please, she cried, tears mixing with the throbbing on her cheek. Think about our baby. My baby, he corrected, cold as harmattan wind at midnight. When that child is born, I will take it from you. No child of mine will be raised by a murderer. Outside, a neighbor named Iyabo had heard the commotion and hurried over, her wrapper hastily tied. She had seen Mama Ngozi earlier that same afternoon, crouched behind the kitchen mixing pesticide for the cocoyam beetles, without gloves, without care, coughing into her own hand more than once. I saw her with the pesticide myself, Iyabo tried to explain to the gathering crowd. Before evening, before that tea. But a car had already pulled up outside, its headlights cutting through the compound. Chinedu's uncle stepped out, a senior officer at the local police division, his uniform pressed, and his authority heavier than any argument a farm woman could raise. He pulled Iyabo aside, spoke to her in a low voice that no one else could hear, and by the time he released her, she no longer wished to repeat what she had seen. The pesticide bottle beneath Mama Ngozi's chair was collected and sealed inside a bag, as though it were the only truth in the room. The teacup Mama Ngozi herself had prepared, the cup that should have told the real story, disappeared from the house before anyone thought to test what remained inside it. At the station, Amara sat on a hard bench through the night. Her stomach tightening with pains, she prayed were only fear. She begged for a doctor. She was told to wait. She begged again. She was told to be quiet. By morning, she was brought before a magistrate for a hearing, so rushed it barely deserved the name. Mama Ngozi's statement, delivered through tears and trembling hands, was treated as though it were carved in stone. No one asked about the missing cup. No one asked why a senior police officer already seemed to know the details of a private family land dispute. Amara was remanded, the matter left for further investigation, words that, in Umuori, often meant a case would sleep for months while a life was destroyed in the waiting. As two officers led her toward the van, Chinadu stood at the back of the courtroom, arms folded, refusing to meet her eyes. "My lawyer is preparing the divorce papers," he said flatly, as though announcing the weather. Amara turned to face him fully, her voice breaking but steady. "Even if you no longer love me, at least investigate the truth. My mother nearly died. And your wife," Amara answered, "is still dying. Only nobody is watching." He walked away without turning back. The van doors closed behind her, swallowing the daylight, and carried her toward a place where Mercy was a stranger, and every woman inside already believed the worst about her before she had said a single word. The gate of the women's cell groaned open. Amara stepped through, clutching her stomach, her legs weak beneath her. A broad-shouldered woman rose from a mat in the corner, folding her arms as she looked Amara up and down like a market woman inspecting spoiled goods. "The woman who poisons old mothers has arrived," Auntie Razor announced to the room, and laughter rippled through the darkness like a wave with no mercy in it. Inside that cell, Auntie Razor ruled like a queen without a crown, and everyone, guard and prisoner alike, understood her law before she ever needed to speak it aloud. She decided who ate first and who ate the leftovers scraped from the bottom of the pot. She decided who slept near the small window where night air could reach, and who slept pressed against the sour, airless wall. And now, standing before Amara, she decided something else. She snatched the plate meant for Amara before it ever reached her hands. "Murderers of old women do not eat before human beings," she said, tipping the plate toward the floor, so the little food it held scattered uselessly across the concrete. Nobody in that cell defended her. To them, she was simply the poisoner, a name whispered first by a corrupt warder who had been paid in small notes to make sure Amara's arrival was already a story before she ever opened her mouth to tell her own. The warder did not stop at spreading gossip. Passing Amara's corner one evening with a satisfied smile, she leaned close enough for only Amara to hear. "Your husband's family has already prepared a nursery," she said. "New curtains, new cot. They are not wasting time waiting for your case to finish." Amara said nothing, but that night, curled on the cold floor, with her arms wrapped around her stomach like a mother bird shielding an egg from rain, something inside her cracked quietly, without sound, without witness. For 3 days, she survived on little more than water, and secret handfuls of soaked cassava passed to her by a quiet woman named Bisi, who kept to herself in the far corner, awaiting trial for a theft she insisted belonged to her employer, not to her own 2 hands. Each time Bisi helped her, she risked a beating for it. Yet she came anyway, small kindness moving through darkness like a candle refusing to be blown out. One evening, as Bisi passed her a folded piece of paper, her hand froze. Attached to Amara's case file, glimpsed briefly through the warder's careless handling, was a company stamp Bisi recognized instantly, a stamp she had once typed onto hundreds of documents in a different life, before that same company's name became the reason she was locked away. "That name," Bisi whispered, her eyes suddenly wide. "I know that company. I used to work." The warder's footsteps interrupted her, and Bisi swallowed the rest of her sentence, her secret folding itself back into silence. That night, the attacks grew worse. Fists and slaps came from the darkness, feet aimed carelessly near her stomach, voices hissing insults about murderers and witches who deserved whatever they received. Amara curled tighter, absorbing every blow with her back, her shoulders, anything but the child she carried inside her. By the time the beating stopped, something warm had begun spreading beneath her wrapper. Blood. "Warder! Warder, please!" Bisi screamed toward the locked door, banging both fists against the cold metal. "She is bleeding!" The baby. The warder, still half asleep at her post, waved a dismissive hand through the small window slot. "Another trick," she muttered. "These women will do anything to leave this place." But Auntie Razor, who had said nothing through the chaos, went suddenly still. Years earlier, in a different cell, in a different city, she too had bled, while officers ignored her cries, and she had lost a child she never got the chance to hold. She had buried that memory deep beneath every hardness she wore like armor. Now, seeing blood soak through Amara's wrapper in the dim light, that old grief rose up inside her, sharp and unwelcome. She needs a hospital. Auntie Razor's voice thundered through the cell, and when the warder still refused to move, she seized her metal cup and struck it against the door, once, twice, again and again, until the sound became a call the entire block could not ignore. The banging did not stay inside one cell for long. Cup after cup joined Auntie Razor's, a rhythm of metal against metal, spreading down the corridor, like drums announcing danger in the old stories Amara's grandmother used to tell. Voices rose with the noise, demanding attention, demanding mercy, demanding that somebody, anybody, come and see what was happening to a pregnant woman left to bleed on a concrete floor. The superintendent, woken from his quarters by a racket he could no longer pretend not to hear, finally gave the order. Amara was pulled from the cell, half-conscious, and rushed through the gates into a waiting vehicle bound for Umuorie General Hospital. Doctors surrounded her the moment she arrived, their voices sharp with urgency. Blood pressure dangerously high, signs of injury to the placenta, dehydration that had gone untreated for days. Both mother and child now balanced on a thread thinner than anyone in that room wanted to admit aloud. A call was placed to Chinedu. He did not come. "My mother is the victim here," he told the nurse over the phone, his voice flat, already rehearsed from repeating the same words to himself for days. Let the case follow its own course. The nurse who took that call was a young woman named Nkem, sharp-eyed and unhurried in her manner, the kind of nurse who noticed details others allowed to slip past them. When she finally stepped into Amara's room to check her vitals, something about the name on the chart tugged at her memory. She had heard that name before. Not from gossip, from her own clinic records. Weeks earlier, before any accusation, before any tea, Nkem had personally treated Mama Ngozi at a private clinic across town. After the older woman arrived coughing and dizzy, complaining that she had accidentally inhaled fumes while mixing pesticide without gloves or proper caution. Nkem remembered writing the notes herself, remembered the date stamped clearly at the top of the file. That date sat uneasily in her mind now, refusing to let her rest. If Mama Ngozi had already been exposed to pesticide before that night, before the tea, before the accusation that destroyed a young wife's freedom, then the poisoning everyone believed in so completely may never have happened the way the whole village had been told. Nkem said nothing to the doctors yet. She simply excused herself, walked briskly to the records office, and pulled the old clinic file with hands that trembled slightly despite her calm face. The date confirmed everything her memory had already whispered to her. Later that night, once the ward had grown quiet and Amara lay resting beneath the dim glow of a single lamp, Nkem returned, closed the door gently behind her, and sat beside the bed. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice low but steady. "Your mother-in-law was already poisoned before that cup ever touched her lips. The file was in Nkem's hand for less than 10 minutes before somebody came looking for it." She had barely finished explaining to Amara that Mama Ngozi had walked into a private clinic weeks earlier, coughing and dizzy after mixing pesticide with bare hands and no covering over her mouth, when heavy footsteps stopped outside the records office. The old woman was already sick from that chemical before the tea was ever brewed, Nkem said quickly. Whoever placed that bottle under her chair did not create her illness. They only borrowed it. Amara's eyes filled. "Then it can free me." "It can shake them," Nkem answered honestly. "But paper alone cannot say who planned it. A clever lawyer will call it coincidence." By morning, a police officer nobody had summoned arrived asking politely, then less politely, for the clinic file concerning one Mama Ngozi. No name tag, no written request, but Nkem had spent enough years in wards to know the difference between an investigation and a hunt. She had already made 3 copies. One she buried inside a folder of old immunization charts. One she left sealed with the matron. The third she carried out, at the end of her shift, straight into the hands of a legal aid lawyer named Barrister Uduak Etim, who read it twice without speaking, then looked up and said one word, "Finally." Miles away, behind the walls of the correctional center, another silence was breaking. Bissy sat close to Auntie Reza that night, her voice barely rising above the sound of sleeping women. "I know why that company's stamp was on her case file," she whispered. "I used to keep their books. Ubaka Mineral Resources. I sat in that office for 2 years and entered every naira that left it." Auntie Reza turned her head slowly. And there were payments, Bissy said. Money moving to people who had no business receiving it. A woman in Umuwari, a senior police officer in that same division. My Olga told me to move those entries into another column and call them transport allowance. I refused. She swallowed hard. 2 weeks later, money was missing from the safe, and I was the one who took it. Auntie Reza did not speak for a long time. Then she reached beneath the loose block in the corner, where she kept the small phone that no warder had ever found, and placed it in Bissy's palm. "Show me," she said. Bissy's fingers flew, opening photographs she had taken of the ledger pages on the very day she refused. Line after line, the names sat there in ink, waiting years to be read by the right eyes. The 3 women looked at one another as the whole shape of the thing stood up in front of them. This was never simply a mother-in-law who disliked her son's wife. Remove Amara, declare her a criminal, hand the baby to Chinedu, and the cocoa farm could be reached through the child's guardianship, quietly, with signatures instead of violence. The sickness was the performance, the land was the prize, the child was the key. At the hospital that same afternoon, the door of Amara's room opened without a knock. Mama Ngozi entered first, walking slowly, leaning on a stick she had never needed before. Behind her came a lawyer with a leather folder, and behind him, Chinedu, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles, as though counting them would keep him from looking at his wife. The lawyer laid a document on the bed table and spoke about urgent applications, welfare of the unborn child, temporary custody upon delivery. Amara's eyes traveled to the bottom of the page, where a sworn statement described her as unstable, violent, and unfit to hold her own baby. Beneath those words sat a signature she had known since she was 19 years old, Chinedu's. The pain that tore through her waist then had nothing to do with labor, and everything to do with it. The contraction came so hard that Amara's cry emptied the corridor of conversation. Nurses rushed in, machines were dragged closer, and the lawyer with the leather folder was pushed toward the door. Mama Ngozi allowed herself to be led away, dabbing dry eyes, murmuring that she only wanted the best for her grandchild. Chinedu stood in the corridor afterwards, staring at nothing. Let it be said plainly, my people. Chinedu did not know about Ubaka Mineral Resources. He had never counted a single naira from that company. But a man does not need to join a robbery to hold the door open. His refusal to ask one honest question had made him the most useful tool in the whole arrangement. A husband whose signature carried weight, whose grief looked like proof, and whose loyalty had been aimed like a hunter aims a gun. That same evening, back in the women's block, Auntie Reza made a decision that would cost her something. Officer Ivy had grown careless with her greed. She now collected her envelopes inside the block itself, in the storeroom beside the kitchen, where the smell of stockfish covered many things. Bissy hid the phone inside a bucket of soaking beans, pressed against the rim, its small red light recording. Mama Ngozi's voice came through the doorway first, sweet as palm wine and twice as dangerous. Has the delivery date been fixed? Any day now, Officer Ivy replied. Good, my son has signed everything. Once the child is in our hands, the guardianship papers will follow, and the farm will finally move. A pause, then a small laugh with no joy in it. Nobody will ask about a teacup that no longer exists. I washed it myself and buried the pieces behind the fence the same night. And my balance, madam. After the baby. That was all. Less than 2 minutes of talk, enough to hang them all. Bissy's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone retrieving it. Before cockcrow, she had sent copies of the recording and every ledger photograph out through the only road available to women in that place. A visiting cousin, a borrowed number, and a prayer that the signal would hold long enough. The upload bar was still crawling when boots sounded in the corridor. Auntie Razor moved first. She shoved the phone into her wrapper, slammed her own hand into the iron doorframe with all her weight, and screamed loud enough to bring 3 officers running. The bone in her hand cracked cleanly. Blood ran down her wrist. By the time they wrapped the wound and arranged transport to Umuori General Hospital under armed guard, the small phone lay flat and silent beneath the bandage, riding out through the gate on the very hand she had broken to carry it. At the hospital, the corridors had become a stage. Mama Ngozi sat outside Amara's ward with a plastic bag of oranges she had no intention of peeling, telling every nurse who passed that she had forgiven her daughter-in-law, that she only wanted the baby to arrive safely. Nkem waited until Chinedu stepped out for air, then followed him and put the clinic record directly into his hands. "Read the date," she said. "Just the date." He read it. He read it again. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. "She was already breathing that poison before the tea," Nkem pressed. "Ask her, that is all. Ask your own mother one question." And Chinedu, a man standing between a piece of paper and the sound of his mother weeping down the corridor, folded the record, put it in his pocket, and said, "She is old. She is frightened. She would not do this." At 17 minutes past 2 in the morning, Auntie Razor stepped out of the treatment room, bandaged hand held against her chest, and began moving down the corridor toward Amara's door. She had gone barely 20 steps when every light in Umuori General Hospital went out at once. The door handle turned, and a voice Amara had heard at her own wedding leaned over her bed and said, "Once the baby is born, nobody will need you again." Mama Ngozi. A torch clicked on, held low so it lit the bed and not the face above it. Papers rustled. Something cold touched Amara's thumb, an ink pad pressed into her hand by fingers that did not tremble. "Just your thumb," Mama Ngozi said gently, the way one speaks to a stubborn child. "The farm and the child. Sign. And this suffering ends tonight." Amara pulled her hand away and closed it into a fist. "Never? Then we will do it while you sleep." A second shape moved in the darkness. A man in hospital clothes he had no right to wear, drawing liquid into a syringe. "By morning, they will write that you were confused, violent, unfit. Even your own doctors will agree." Amara screamed, but a hand closed over her mouth, and the corridor outside was full of shouting, torches and confusion. Then light exploded from the doorway. Auntie Razor stood there, the small phone raised high in her broken hand, its screen throwing pale light across the room. "Touch her," she said, "and the whole ward will hear what I am holding." She pressed the screen. Mama Ngozi's own voice filled the dark room. Sweet, calm, unhurried, talking about delivery dates and signed papers, talking about guardianship and a farm that would finally move, talking about a teacup she had washed with her own hands and buried behind the fence the same night. The syringe lowered. In the doorway, half hidden by the crowd of nurses gathering with torches, Chinedu stood frozen, hearing his mother confess in a voice he had trusted his entire life. He looked at his wife on that bed, the wife he had slapped into a wall, called a murderer before a magistrate, and sworn to take a child from, and something behind his eyes came apart. "Mama," he said. "Mama, say she edited it. Say it is not you." Mama Ngozi drew herself up straight, and the frailty fell off her like a borrowed coat. "And what did I do that is wrong?" she demanded. "A woman who enters her husband's house owns nothing separately. That land belongs to this family. I only took what tradition already gave us." Uncle Ozoemena pushed through the doorway then, uniform crisp, even at that hour, hand already reaching for the phone, in Auntie Razor's grip. "Evidence obtained illegally. Give it here." And for the first time in 11 days, Chinedu moved. He stepped in front of his uncle and blocked his arm. "Leave it," he said quietly. "Boy, I said leave it. But my people, hear me well. A man who arrives after the house has burned cannot call himself a firefighter." Behind him, machines had begun screaming. Amara's blood pressure was climbing beyond safety. The monitor found the baby's heartbeat and lost it again. Doctors flooded the room, pushing everyone out, wheeling the bed at a run toward the theater, while a nurse shouted for oxygen and another shouted for blood. Emergency section, now! The theater doors swung shut on all of them. On Mama Ngozi's protests, on Uncle Ozoemena's threats, on Chinedu sinking down against the corridor wall with a folded clinic record still in his pocket. Inside, under lights powered by a generator that had finally coughed to life, they lifted the child from Amara's body at 3:04 in the morning. Amara lay flat, tears running sideways into her hair, waiting for the sound every mother waits for. The room stayed silent. Hands moved fast over a small, still body on the warming table. Someone counted, someone rubbed, someone called for suction. And Amara, drifting between this world and the next, kept asking the same question that nobody in that theater would answer. Why is my baby not crying? Please, why can I not hear my baby crying? The cry came at 3:07, thin, angry, and the sweetest sound that hospital had heard in years. Amara wept before she could even see the child. Outside the theater, Chinedu heard it through the wall and stood up. But the doors did not open for him, and no one invited him in. He listened to his daughter announce herself to the world from the wrong side of a locked door, and that, my people, was the beginning of his true sentence. The girl weighed little and spent 19 days under lights in special care before Amara could hold her without wires between them. She named her Nwakaego, a child is greater than money, and every nurse who heard it understood exactly what she meant. What followed was not thunder. Justice in this land rarely arrives like thunder. Barrister Uduak-Etim gathered the pieces one by one and tied them together where nobody could untie them. The clinic record with its stubborn date, the ledger photographs showing money moving from Ubaka Mineral Resources into private pockets, the recording from a storeroom that smelled of stockfish, and finally Iyabo, the neighbor, who found her voice again once she learned she would not be facing Uncle Ozomena alone. An independent panel was appointed after the case reached the newspapers. They found station entries written in ink of 2 different dates. They found an exhibit register with a teacup listed and then crossed out. They dug behind a fence in Umuori and brought up broken pieces of china wrapped in cloth. Months passed. Files went missing and were found again. Amara attended hearing after hearing with a baby strapped to her back, and more than once she sat in a corridor from morning till evening, only to be told to return another day. But the charge of attempted murder was withdrawn. Bissi's conviction was reopened, and Ubaka Mineral Resources found itself explaining to a court why its own bookkeeper had been jailed within 2 weeks of refusing to move entries into a different column. Auntie Reza, whose true name, the records showed, was Ijeoma Nwaturuocha, finally received a lawyer of her own, and a formal inquiry was opened into the child she had lost years earlier in a cell while officers ignored her cries. She did not weep in court. She sat straight and told it plainly, and the room went quiet. Mama Ngozi, Uncle Ozoemena, Officer Ivy, and 2 representatives of the mining company faced separate proceedings. Not one of them fell quickly. Money speaks many languages, and it spoke all of them in those months. But the recording never disappeared, because it had never lived in only one place. Chinedu testified, and he told the truth, all of it, including the slap, including the signature, including the day a nurse handed him a clinic record, and he chose his mother's tears over a date printed in black ink. His honesty cost him his name in that village. It did not buy back his marriage. Amara filed for divorce and did not withdraw it. Then came the custody hearing, on a bright Tuesday that smelled of dust and coming harmattan. Chinedu stood before the court, thinner, quieter, and asked for something he knew he had no right to request, to be some small part of his daughter's life. The judge turned to the woman seated with a sleeping child against her shoulder. "Madam," he said, "this man once swore in writing that you were unfit to hold this baby. Tell this court plainly, should he ever be permitted near her at all?" The whole room waited for Amara to open her mouth. Amara stood, adjusted the child on her shoulder, and gave an answer nobody in that courtroom expected. "No," she said, "I will not go back to him as a wife." Chinedu's head dropped. "A man can be sorry," she continued, her voice steady as a woman carrying water uphill. "Sorry is good, but sorry is not the same as trust. Trust is a pot. When it breaks, you may glue it and admire it on a shelf, but you will never again carry water in it." Then she surprised even her own lawyer. "But this child did not choose her father, and I will not raise her on hatred. Let him see her, supervised, at fixed times, in a place the court approves. Let him attend counseling. Let him keep his hands and his tongue far from anger. The day he breaks one of those conditions, the door closes and it does not open again." The judge wrote it down exactly as she said it. She kept the cocoa farm, every tree, every root, every inch. When the first good harvest came, she set a portion aside, some for Bisi, who rented a small shop and began again with her name cleared, and some for Barrister Uduak's office, which now took cases of pregnant women held in cells with nobody to shout for them. Ijoma Nwaturocha did not become a saint. She still spoke roughly, still frightened people in queues, still carried the hardness prison had welded onto her. But she came to that farm every harvest, and once, standing among the trees, she said that striking a door with a metal cup was the first useful thing she had done in 11 years. The years passed the way years do, quietly and all at once. One morning, long after the case files had gathered dust, Amara stood at the edge of her farm and watched a small girl dip a metal cup into a bucket and pour water around a young cocoa seedling. The cup knocked the rim each time, tin, 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 and Amara had to hold the fence. Because that same sound, on a night of blood and locked doors, was the sound that had saved 2 lives. A breeze came and bent the seedling almost flat, and Nuakego cried out, thinking it would break. "It will stand," Amara told her daughter. "Look at it well. A tree without roots will beg every wind for permission to stand. This one has roots. Your grandfather buried them here before you were born. Hear the lesson, my people, and take it home with you." Chinedu's greatest failure was never that he loved his mother. His failure was that he handed her his eyes, his ears, and his judgment, and asked her to think on his behalf. Love without fairness is only cruelty wearing good clothes. And as our elders say, a lie may run through the village at dawn, but truth knows every road home. The child they tried to steal grew beneath the trees they failed to take. Now tell me, when loyalty asks you to close your eyes to the truth, is that still loyalty, or is it something else wearing loyalty's face? Put your answer in the comments, because somebody reading this today is standing exactly where Chinedu stood, and your words may be the thing that opens their eyes. And if this story moved you, do not walk away empty-handed. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notification bell, because next week another true-to-life story is coming. One about a woman everybody in her village had already written off, until the day she walked back through that same gate holding something nobody expected. You will not want to miss it.